The Drum, the Doll, and the Zombie by John Bellairs and Brad Strickland. Chapter 7. But Grandma was fine, and she fussed over Major Harrison Dixon as if he were still her little boy. For a few hours that evening, Johnny forgot all about being unhappy, and even his father's frequent worried looks at Grandma did little to bring his high spirits down. "Did you tell Mom about Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow, Pop?" asked Johnny's dad that evening. "Yep, and she can be mad at you for a change," said Grandpa, grinning. "Land sakes," said Grandma in a fuzzy voice. "I still can't see any sense in your ordering a turkey and trimmings from the store. Don't you want some home cooking for a change, Harry?" Johnny's dad laughed. "Sure," he said, "but I want you to rest tomorrow, too. So Pop and I will drive into town early and bring everything back, and the most you can do is bake us a couple of cherry pies." He winked at Johnny. "Say, Old Scout, are those pies as good as I remember?" Johnny blushed. Old Scout was a name his dad had always used for him. "They sure are," he said, and everyone laughed. It was a sound that he liked to hear. The Dixons always had an early Thanksgiving dinner. The next day they all settled around the table at 2:00. Grandpa gave thanks, and they dug in. Even though it had all come from a restaurant and not from Grandma's kitchen, the turkey dressing and trimmings tasted delicious. After dinner, Johnny's dad insisted that he and Johnny would clear the table and wash the dishes, and they did. Then Grandma, who had been supervising, went upstairs for a nap, and Grandpa turned on the radio to hear a football game. "Feel like taking a walk, Old Scout?" asked Major Dixon. Sure," said Johnny. "Let me get my jacket." He ran upstairs, wondering what was up. Johnny suspected that his dad was worried about Grandma, because he had noticed how concerned the Major seemed every time he glanced at the old woman. Johnny wished he could tell his father the truth about Grandma's illness, but that would mean breaking his word to the professor. He hurried downstairs and found his dad waiting beside the front door. Major Dixon was wearing civilian clothes, a red-plaid flannel shirt, and Levi's that he had pulled on one of Grandpa's old jackets. Johnny thought he looked older and thinner than he remembered, but he still had the same short light brown hair and the same ironic gray eyes, and the same lopsided grin. "Ready to go?" he asked. The weather had changed completely. They walked down Fillmore Street toward town under a bright blue sky and warm sunshine. All the shops were closed for the holiday, and Dunstan Heights looked like a ghost town. Johnny and his father walked to Johnny's school and went into the schoolyard, where they settled under the swings. Johnny began to swing, but his father just sat there. Johnny pumped a few times and felt the stomach-dropping thrill of a big swoop. For a moment, he forgot all about Dr. Coote and the frightening Mama Sinestra. His father chuckled. "Swinging's like flying, you know," he said. "When I was even younger than you are now, I used to swing in the schoolyard. My toes would point up above the treetops, and I knew I wanted to be a pilot." Johnny let the swing settle down. The chains creaked less loudly. The swing moved slower until finally he was just sitting there beside his dad. "I'm glad you can be here through Christmas," he said. His father had told him that he would have to leave Dunstan Heights on December 26th to report back to his base on time. For a few minutes, Major Dixon did not respond. At last, in a serious voice, he said, "John, I want to talk to you." Johnny swallowed. His dad never used that man-to-man tone with him before, and Johnny sensed that something important was on his father's mind. "All right," he said. Major Dixon smiled at him, and then he looked away. "Well, it's hard for me to put into words. It all started when your mother died. She was so young, and her death seemed so senseless, and it made me angry, more angry than I had ever been. I wanted to hit back, do you understand?" Johnny's stomach felt fluttery, the way it had when he was swinging. "Yeah," he muttered. "I guess I sort of felt mad, too." His father nodded and sighed. "Well, unfortunately, you can't hit back at cancer. I had no way to let my anger out. Then the Korean War began, and the Air Force called me back. In an odd way, that helped. I love flying, as you know. But there's something else, Johnny." Major Dixon bit his lip and then turned to his son. "You see, every time I fired on an enemy plane or dropped a bomb, I felt that I was finally hitting back. It was crazy, but that was the way it seemed." Johnny felt miserable. The warm, sunny day suddenly seemed cold and empty. He missed his mother terribly, and he always tried not to think too much about her, because remembering brought back the pain. But now he had to remember her. "I can understand," he said, feeling as if he were about to cry. His dad reached out and put his hand on Johnny's shoulder, and that helped. In a soft voice, Major Dixon said, "Well, that all changed when I got shot down. I was wounded, as you remember. It wasn't much, but it kept me from flying for a few months. When I got well, the Air Force needed me for transport service. I flew rations and equipment and supplies for a while. and I flew bodies. Bodies? Asked Johnny. His dad took his hand off Johnny's shoulder. His craggy face had a look of deep sadness. Yes, bodies of the dead and bodies of the wounded. I evacuated our boys to Japan. It was very rough, Johnny. I saw for the first time how war was hurting so many young men, and that was when all my anger finally left me. When I saw all those boys, 18, 19 years old, it suddenly hit me. I hadn't really been shooting at your mother's sickness. I'd been shooting at kids. Sure, they were Korean kids, but they were no different from American kids. Once I understood that, all my hatred just dropped away. Johnny could not think of anything to say. He stared down at the dirt beneath the swings, scuffing his toes back and forth, making little half-moon ruts in the damp, sandy soil. Now, John, his father said, I want you to understand why I'm still in the Air Force and not home with you. I have 2 reasons. First is money. I have established a special trust account for you, and I have been putting a lot of money into it. You have enough to go to any college you want. I've been sending Grandma and Grandpa money to help them out. But now I can send them more. If I stay in the Air Force for just a few more years, I can retire with a nice pension and never have to worry about working again. And you still get to fly, said Johnny. Major Dixon nodded. Yes, in the meantime I get to fly. Now the second reason is much harder for me to put into words. When I saw those dead and wounded boys, I worried about you. 5 or 6 years from now, I don't want you flown back from some senseless war all shot up. I'm not a very great thinker, Johnny, but it seems to me that our best hope of avoiding war is to keep our country so strong that no enemy will attack us. That is why I'm training pilots for the Strategic Air Command. Can you understand that? I think so, Johnny said. His dad grinned and suddenly looked years younger, just the way Johnny remembered before he had gone to war. You're smarter than I was at your age, son. Well, that's what I had to tell you, and now I want to ask you something. You don't have to answer right now, but think about it. You see, I'll be eligible for early retirement in about 8 months. I wouldn't get my full pension, just a small one, so I'd have to keep working. However, Delta Airlines has offered me a job. It's an up-and-coming company and it needs good pilots. If you want, I can quit the Air Force then and you can come and live with me again. Johnny's heart thumped. He had not expected this. He started to say, Yes, Dad. Then he had second thoughts. What would saying yes mean? Johnny tried to control his voice. Would we still live here with Grandma and Grandpa? Well, no. You and I would move to Atlanta, and because I would still be away from home a lot, we would have to hire a housekeeper to stay with you. Johnny looked away, past the school and toward St. Michael's Church. He thought of Father Higgins and Professor Childermass and Fergie and everyone else he knew in Dustin Heights. He would have to leave them all behind. And what about Grandma and Grandpa? It was a very difficult decision to make. Think it over, old scout, said his father. I want to do what is best for you. Johnny nodded, but he felt terrible. He did not want such a big responsibility, and he was confused and torn. On the one hand, he had often dreamed of living with his father again, but on the other hand, he was deeply attached to all his friends in Dustin Heights, and was a little afraid of moving to a strange place like Atlanta. He tried to imagine what it would be like there, hot and humid and very different probably. The food would be unusual, and the people would talk with a strange accent. Worse, maybe they would not even like him. He had heard that Southerners often thought they were still fighting the Civil War, and that they all hated Yankees. Still, he would have a home with his father. It was all very bewildering. Ready to head back? Asked Major Dixon. Yeah, said Johnny. He slipped off the swing, and they walked up the long hill and turned onto Fillmore Street. Dad, asked Johnny when they were still a few blocks from home, what do you want to do? Major Dixon sighed. Part of me wants you to stay here with Grandma and Grandpa because I worry, and I know you will look after them for me. They are getting older, and Grandma's health is not very good. She looks so thin and pale, but another part of me wants you to live with me so we can be together like a father and son should. It's all mixed up. I'll bet you figure that when you grow up, things are clear and you always know what to do. Yeah, admitted Johnny. Sorry, old scout. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Well, at least you'll have a month to think about what you would like. As they approached his grandparents' house, Johnny saw Professor Childermass standing on the porch. The old man wore his disreputable topcoat and had his smashed-up fedora crushed onto his head, as if he had just returned from somewhere. His eyes lit up when he saw Johnny. Ah, here you are, he said. Out for a constitutional. Major Dixon grinned. Right, Professor, say. Why weren't you ever as friendly to me as you are to Johnny? You had me scared to death when I was in your history class. As well you deserved to be, growled the professor. As I recall, Harry Dixon, you flunked the first examination in Western civilization rather spectacularly, and don't expect me to forgive you just because you wear that ridiculous military hardware on your shoulders now. As for Johnny, he is candid when he lacks information and always asks for assistance instead of pretending to have knowledge he does not possess. Let me quote from your examination paper. Ahem. The Peloponnesian Wars were fought between Athens and a great general named Peloponnesium. Disgraceful. Major Dixon threw his hands up and laughed. I surrender, Professor. My gosh, it's been almost 20 years since I wrote that exam. I've never seen anybody with a memory for other people's mistakes like yours. The price of wisdom is eternal vigilance against ignorance, paraphrased the professor pompously. Now, if you will allow him, Johnny is invited over to my house to sample a special Thanksgiving cake I baked just for the occasion. If you are very lucky, I may even send a slice over for you. It's a deal, agreed Major John Dixon as he went inside. Johnny and the professor crossed Fillmore Street. The professor acted very mysterious until they were inside his house, and then he shut the door. And he had shut the door. Then he turned and said, Johnny, I have been consulting over a friend over at Miskatonic University. Dr. Andrew Armitage is a professor who has spent many years studying sympathetic magic, the kind of enchantments that use dolls and images. He has suggested a course of action that may remove the curse that the old woman placed on your grandmother. Now, I am going to ask you to do something that may sound just a little odd. Will you trust me? Sure, said Johnny. What a day this was turning out to be. Suddenly, every grown-up Johnny knew seemed to be asking for his advice and help. What do you want me to do? The professor took on a forced lightness. Oh, not a very great task, Johnny. It should be simple for you to do. In fact, I believe you're the only person who could do it. Do what? Asked Johnny again, bewildered. With an uncomfortable grin, the professor said, Nothing much. Just steal something from your grandmother for me. Now, would you like a nice cool glass of milk with your coconut fudge cake? And that is the end of chapter 7.